Now I would like to transition over and introduce Shawn Rosenmoss, who is part of the SF Department of the Environment, and Kamille Lang, specialist at the San Mateo County Office of Sustainability, for our civic engagement and public policy panel. And this panel will be moderated by our communications member, Ashita.
Thank you all for joining, and to Ms. Shawn Rosenmoss and Ms. Kamille Lang for coming. I believe you both have presentations, so you can begin presenting.
Okay, so hello. I guess I am going first. So I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm not, I'm not really good with PowerPoint, and I'd kind of just like to talk a little bit. So I'm Shawn Rosenmoss. I work for the San Francisco Department of the Environment. My actual title is Manager of Development, Community Partnerships, and the San Francisco Carbon Fund. So I took a science communications workshop a few months ago, and they always say start with a question. And so my question is, who's feeling a little anxious about climate change, right? Who has days when it feels so out of control they want to stay in bed? Who has days when they're so pissed off that they're inspired to do something, right? I think that all of those things exist in all of us. And I think what we need to do, hopefully, is like, when I'm having those really bad days, you're not. And when you're having those really bad days, I'm not, so that we've always got someone on charge with climate. I hope I'm going to tell you some things that build off of your last speaker. And then always when I'm speaking to anyone younger than I am, I always start with, I'm sorry, right? I am sorry that my generation did not do a better job. I'm sorry you have to deal with climate change. I'm sorry that my history has come to bite your future on the butt, right? But hopefully, we can work together. I have a lot of confidence that we can, and make something happen. So just a little bit about me. I come from this work from a social justice background. I'm going to be 65 in a month. I got an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering in the mid 70s, when women were seriously discouraged from going to engineering school. I was told in high school that I couldn't take Algebra 2 and Trig in the same semester. And they said, because girls couldn't do stuff like that, it would be too hard. So I did it anyway, but it was a social justice issue. I worked in Silicon Valley in the early 80s. I've been an educator. So my background isn't really, we have to protect the redwoods. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. Thank God someone's doing it. But I do this work mainly for my kids, for the kids I drove in carpool for years, for the kids I worked with in public housing and foster care, because, we need to do this for our children. I'm also really involved in what I call urban environmental work, right? This is my focus. And I say urban because that's where the bulk of people on the planet live. They live in cities, and we need to solve these problems very often at the urban level. And fortunately for me, I get to work in a really progressive city, right? I get to work in San Francisco, in the state of California. Obviously, there's a ton of work to do, but we do have a lot of political will. We still have to deal with homelessness. We still have to deal with income issues and education and diminishing diversity. But climate action crosses over all of those issues, right? When we take appropriate climate action, we can deal with some of these other issues. And I'm saying this because, whatever career you're interested in, the jobs, the work, whatever it is, as Mark was kind of alluding to, education, psychology, tech, medicine, building, cleaning, design, right? Finance, all of those things intersect with climate action, right? So it's a continuum, and whatever you're doing to help solve the Earth's problems are going to intersect with climate and the environment, right? So you can feed a lot of your passions. And one of the things that I've learned about climate change and about moving forward is that we have some communications issues, right? For a long time, there was this idea that environmentalism was really just like tree hugging white guys. So we've had to overcome that, but there's also so much wonkiness. There's so much data. And I think that we haven't done a really good job of communicating that, right? And I also think it's set us back because, who could communicate? The fossil fuel industry. So policymakers have really got to do a better job of communicating, right? We couldn't really tell the story of what was going on, and the fossil fuel industry jumped in and made up a story that gained a lot of traction because they could explain it better. in a way that was wrong, of course. So like, just an example, for years in San Francisco, we set goals and we said things like, we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 90% below 1990 levels by 2040. Honest to God, it makes me want to leave my body just saying that sentence. So how can how is anybody else going to relate to that? I always compare it. When I was a kid, we had Charlie Brown cartoons. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but the teacher is talking and telling the kids what to do, but all the kids hear is wah, 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 wah. And so I think that was a lot of our communications around climate. So we've gotten better as a city around communicating. And I think climate people and environmentalists in general are getting better. Um, and again, I'm telling you this because we need your help communicating, right? We need to talk to each other. We need to talk to people who aren't bought in, and we have to communicate much better without being too wah, 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 because no one wants to hear that. And we also need to be talking about, as Mark was talking about, the technology and some of the really fabulous stuff that's going on in the world. This is stuff people need to hear about, right? This is stuff that we need to tell people about and we need to understand so that we can start imagining a future, right? So that we're not always talking about the doom and the gloom, but we really have a vision for what it could look like. And it's not just a vision, it's happening. So in San Francisco, several years ago, we thought, okay, well, we got to do a better job of talking about our goals. And essentially, our goals are zero waste, zero toxics, 80% of all trips taken in sustainable modes of transit, 100% renewable energy, and routes, 0, 80, 100 routes. The first three goals are about reducing our emissions. They're about doing less bad. The roots goal is really about pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. It's about doing more good and healing the planet. So how do we as a city use our trees, our soil, our plants to draw down carbon? So that's kind of the science wonky part of it. And we're measuring all of that. But the metaphorical part of it is, how do we get back to our roots of community? How do we get back to our roots of taking care of each other and sticking together? Because we are going to have to do that, right? I mean, that one of the things that really causes me a lot of eco anxiety is when I feel like I'm alone with this. And then I look at you, and of course, we're not alone. And we need to keep telling ourselves that, and we need to keep talking to each other, and we need to keep sticking together. San Francisco just released its climate action plan 3 days ago. It's our next iteration. We still have the same goals, 0, 80, 100 routes, but now we're really looking at how far can we dig down into those goals? How are we going to actually achieve those goals? So we have a lot of sub goals and strategies. We need to get rid of all fossil fuels. We want to use 100% renewable electricity in all of our buildings, because we know in San Francisco, about half of our emissions are coming from buildings. We also know that about half of our emissions are from transportation. So we've got to do a better job with mass transit. We've got to make it more attractive. We got to make it easier for people to use. I talked about how we're going to solve homelessness by dealing with climate. Well, we're going to build 5,000 new units of housing every year. And those new units are going to be really dense, and they're going to be next to transit. How do we get people out of their cars, right? That's the first thing, get them out of their cars. But we know that there are some people who are going to have to drive. So let's set up an infrastructure that allows them to get electric vehicles and use them conveniently. Although we don't want everyone just to switch out your car for an electric vehicle. That's not going to work. So we want to make it really, really unattractive to have a car. If you need one, yes, absolutely. But how do we disincentivize driving? How do we make it more expensive? How do we make it more inconvenient? Make our transit better so that we're balancing those things. One of the things that we're looking at as a city, which we've never really talked about, but we know how much carbon is related to the clothes we buy, the food we eat. And so how can we have more responsible production and consumption? And how can we sell that idea to residents and businesses in San Francisco? We want to reduce food waste. We want to embrace plant-rich diets. We want to convince everyone. So everything I'm wearing comes from a thrift store. I hope everything you're wearing comes from a thrift store, right? How do we convince people just to stop consuming so much? Because that's a huge environmental impact. And back to roots, we've got a lot of plans for how we're going to enhance and maintain our urban services, our trees, our plants, our soil, so that we can sequester carbon. But part of that is, when we're talking about urban forests and pulling down carbon, we want to make sure that every neighborhood has green space, right? We want to make sure that that carbon sequestration is about more than just drawing down carbon. It gets back to the whole idea of equity and fairness. So if my neighborhood has a park in it, your neighborhood has a park in it, right? Because otherwise it's not going to work. So that's some of the action that the city is doing. And for me also, that helps with eco-anxiety, is this idea of getting into individual action. So you can look at the city's goals, 0, 80, 100 routes. You can say, what am I doing personally about those goals, right? How can I lay zero waste over what I'm doing? What am I doing around transportation? I assume most of you are probably on mass transit if you live in this city. So you can lay that over your own lives. But individual action is only going to get us so far, right? Don't stop that. And again, with the communication, right? I talked about the fossil fuel industry and how we didn't communicate very well and they did. One of the things we know now is that the fossil fuel industry spent a lot of time on getting this messaging out that it was all about individual action, right? Telling us that, well, we can't really do anything, but you need to be doing X, Y, and Z. That's true. Lots of individual action, but and they spent a lot of money trying to make us believe that it was all about us. We can eat less meat, eat no meat, but that doesn't get at the policy work and the advocacy that needs to be done. That doesn't put the responsibility on the people who really need to be taking responsibility, which are big corporations, right? All of our individual action is not going to get them to change, unless our individual action, of course, involves yelling at people, marching, voting, sending letters. The other thing is, it doesn't help government do its job, right? Our job is to serve the people. And so we also have our work that we need to do in addition to relying on your individual actions. So, since our job is to help people, we do want you to feel like we've got your back. If you live in San Francisco, we as a city want you to feel like you're not alone in this fight, that we're all in this together. And I know a lot of other cities, you're going to hear from San Mateo. I know that they have that same idea that we need to feel like we're working together. But if you don't feel like we have your back, if you're not feeling like we're moving fast enough, if you're not feeling like we're doing enough, show up and demand that we do better. We're your government. That's our job. Show up and demand that we move faster. Fortunately, at the moment, we do have a federal government that is really interested in climate change. It's still not enough, right? We still have to march. We still have to vote. And one of the things that I always talk about is when we're out there marching, when you're out there with your friends, protesting or whatever it is you're going to do. And I know you're going to hear from some major activists later on today. When you're out there, crank up some good marching music, right? Dance, sing, laugh, have some fun, because I assure you, climate deniers hate to see that shit, right? They'd be more than happy if we continued with this argument of doom and gloom and it's so grim. And yes, those things are true, but we're going to have some fun. We're going to have to mix joy in with the courage, or we're not going to be able to go much further, right? It's going to be exhausting. But again, it always really pisses off the right when they see us having fun. There's also, I talked about some of the technology that's available and the stories that we're telling. There is so much going on. Mark talked about it. I do a lot of work with the Department of Energy for the federal government. I do a lot of work with our California Energy Commission. Check those two places out, man. You will be amazed at the stuff that's going on. Renewable jet fuel, sustainable jet fuel, battery technology that's going to be cheaper and cleaner and recyclable. That's going on in California. That's going on all over the country. That's going on all over the world. And we need to know those stories so we can start telling people about them. And just one very small project. I go to New Orleans a lot because my family is there. So a bunch of college students in New Orleans were very concerned because there wasn't a big market for recycling glass. And the waste haulers stopped picking that up. So they developed this technology, if you can call it that. They were grinding down the glass until it got back to the level of sand, putting it in sandbags. And those are used all over New Orleans, right, for flooding and resiliency. Flooding is happening all over the world. So the federal government has given that project $700,000 to look at how do you scale that up? How can we as a country scale that up? So we're recycling glass and we're using this glass in sandbags as a resiliency measure. That's just one tiny story. Those stories are happening all over the world. I talked about our soil and carbon. One of the biggest projects I'm working on is this idea of soil carbon sequestration. We know when we put our compost on rangelands and ag lands, that soil draws down a lot more carbon. It pulls carbon emissions out of the atmosphere. It's not the only solution, but is one solution. So it makes our soil healthier, this compost. It doesn't need as much water, right? It helps the soil retain water. We don't use as much fertilizer. And one of the things we found out in the fires is that vineyards that were using San Francisco and Bay Area compost did not burn as badly. They were more resilient to the fire, probably because the soil was better and the plants were healthier, right? And so that's easy, man. That's just throwing your banana peel in your green bin. That's something that we can all do in a minute. So again, those are positive stories. I want to get them out to people. I want you to get them out to people. I want you to march. I want you to vote. I want you to tell us what to do in the city so that we can help. And so, to wrap up, individual action, compost, use plastic straws, learn about climate change, talk about climate change, march, vote. And also share your climate grief and your shock and your overwhelm. I have it. Maybe you have it, but we need to kind of pledge to lift each other up and get through it, because it is going to take courage. It's going to be a long ride, right? We have to support each other. So I'm just going to close by quoting our U.S. Poet Laureate, Amanda Gorman. New dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it. Thank you.
Thank you to Ms. Shawn Rosenmoss for giving us that presentation. Now we'll hear from Ms. Kamille Lang from the San Mateo County of Sustainability. So if you'd like to begin your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Ishita. And thank you, Shawn. Oh my gosh, I could not have pictured a better baseline to follow up on. I'm going to keep my presentation super brief so I can actually get a chance to talk to both of you in a moment. But very quickly, you can see in my Zoom background here that my name is Kamille Lang. My preferred pronouns are she and her, and I'm a resource conservation specialist with San Mateo County's Office of Sustainability. Shawn did such a great explanation of what local government is working on to get things better than they are now. And I also wanted to start my presentation by saying I'm sorry. It's something we're working on together, and it's not always the way that we want it to go. And I just appreciate the humbleness of understanding that, like, I'm responsible for what things looked like before this. And I'm grateful to see so many people in this space wanting to work together to build a more sustainable future. This is my About Me slide. Very briefly, you can see there's lots of green and blue. I'm from the Bay Area. I grew up here, and it was from immigrant parents taking me outside and doing like the frugal option, where I ended up enjoying so many different outdoor spaces that are unique to the Bay Area. The redwoods, the oak woodlands, the tide pools, all just enamored me as a kid. And I never thought I could have a career path that is not only just working outdoors, but preserving a more that future, so that way we can see these things and you all get to see them as you're growing up too. Before I move on, I went to Humboldt State University after transferring from De Anza College. Go to community college first if that's interesting to you. I definitely recommend it. And at Humboldt State, my degree was in environmental management and protection with an emphasis in environmental education and interpretation. I also have a minor in marine science. So I just pretty much picked all the things that I wanted to do on the weekend and found a way to make that be my work week now too. So this is San Mateo County's Office of Sustainability. This is our mission statement, which I think encapsulates what Shawn was sharing as well. The mission statement for the organization I work for is building a sustainable community that fulfills the needs of the present and the future. The website to learn more about the Office of Sustainability is on this slide, and I highly encourage you to check out how we're trying to work with people to build the sustainable future. And you can see the word community is in here because I can't do this alone. Shawn and I can't do it alone. We need everyone in this space talking about this, taking action to have that future that we want to see. And I know you know this, but I wanted to show you that these are pictures taken in San Mateo County over the past 5 years, demonstrating that climate change is not just something in the future. This is something that's here right now that's impacting the way we live our lives. There's erosion in Pacifica, wildfires that break out in San Bruno, flooding in Redwood City, heat waves that are taking over the entire state, as well as sea level rise in Foster City. These are impacts of climate change that we are seeing change the way that we can get to school, the way that we are using local transportation to get up to the city. And they're going to change the way we live our lives in the future. It's not just something that's impacting the polar bears and the ice caps. It's something that's happening really close to home, and it's going to change how our society functions, what's equitable in our future, and then also how our economy functions. So with this information in mind, I have the amazing privilege to work on the climate change team within the Office of Sustainability. My background is in education, and that's where my passion is, to communicate about these issues. And so I run these two programs that are all about climate change education with high school students. I'll talk a little bit more about them in the next few slides. But I also work with our Sustainability Academy. If you're interested in taking free online workshops to just learn about how to actually compost at home, you are more than welcome to check out Sustainability Academy and sign up for one of our virtual or in-person workshops, because we have to start somewhere. We have to figure out like what it looks like to change just a little bit, and those individual behavior changes are what we use to scaffold like Sustainability Academy. So definitely check that out. And like Shawn mentioned, it's a huge equity issue right now, seeing how climate change is impacting different people, or climate change is impacting people differently. And so we need to see solutions that are equitable and thoughtful of the different communities that are getting hit first and worst with these climate impacts. With that in mind, I had the opportunity to start a racial equity and social justice work group within my office, and this is pursuing updating our internal processes so that way it actually is fair and just for everyone, and we know how to address the biggest issue in the room of communicating with people about these issues as it comes within the lens of equity. I also run our social media, so you could give us a follow on Instagram or Twitter. It's at Sustain SMC. I would love to see you there, and we can keep the conversation going on that platform and see how we're communicating these huge issues on something that you can just scroll past on the internet. So I'm the volunteer coordinator for Sustainability Academy. I know Mark brought this up too, that volunteering is such an important part of getting into this, especially at your age. Volunteering at whatever is interesting to you with an organization that matters to you and has the same beliefs and thought processes that you do is so, so important. If you are in San Mateo County and are interested in volunteering, email me, we can find something for you. But this is just showing you what it looks like when people come together, even for like 2 hours on a Saturday, and pick up trash in the neighborhood that matters. Seeing us all come into spaces and dedicate time and passion to these projects just makes it happen in such a great way. And then, yes, like I mentioned, I'm the coordinator for the Racial Equity and Social Justice Work Group. This started in reaction to George Floyd's murder, and we have been developing better and more equitable internal processes, so that way everyone in the Office of Sustainability, as well as every employee in San Mateo County, has tools and support to ensure that their programs and policies are equitable and just for all. Government has a history of being absolutely problematic in this space, and it needs updating, and it needs more people talking about it. And so this has been some of the most difficult work I have at the moment, but the most important, I feel, as well. And then, like I was alluding to, I run those education programs, the Youth Exploring Sea Level Rise Science, or abbreviated as YES program, which is a 2-week-long virtual, now in the pandemic, immersive science class experience, where we actually take a closer look at sea level rise and how that's going to change everything in San Mateo County. And then the Youth Climate Ambassador Program is a leadership program that I run. It's a year-long that you apply to, and it shows like the network that we have potential to grow within San Mateo County with youth leaders wanting to take climate action and be a climate ambassador through this program. All of the programs, all the conversations I have with people of any age start with understanding what is climate change, like what is the baseline that we're up against, looking at the impacts then, and then understanding solutions and inspire and hopefully working together to take action. This is how the Youth Climate Ambassador Program is set up, as well as, I mean, like a basic social media post that we're putting together, right? We have to make sure that we're starting and sharing that baseline information before we can start asking people, what do you think we should do next? Like we need to have that shared understanding of what we're up against and looking at the full scope of the problem. So that way we know what solutions make sense and how to kind of like keep going on all of this. All right, so I have a few more slides, but I think I'm going to stop sharing now because I would much rather talk to Shawn and Ashita. So thanks everyone. I'll turn it back over to Ashita here to give us some more conversations.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, Kamille. I also have some questions for both of you. Our first question is, how can technology help prevent climate change in the future?
Gosh, I can go first if you don't mind, Shawn.
Sure.
Great. For the YES program, the Youth Exploring Sea Level Rise Science, the way we have students explore that is through like augmented reality or like a sea level rise visualization tool. So you can actually see that it's not like 3 feet of water that's going to stack up nicely on top of itself right at our shorelines. It's 3 feet of water that's now able to move further inland and like affect how Highway 101 functions and how Caltrain functions. So I think tech in this space is really important to make the problem visible because we're predicting for the future. And it's like that future impact that we don't want to see, but we need to visualize now so we know how to solve it. Shawn, what do you think?
Well, I love that, right? I love this. I love that project because I've heard about it, this visualizing exactly what it's going to look like, because it is very hard for us as human beings to do that. We're great storytellers, but that idea, it's very difficult for us to envision the impacts of climate change, but also, you know, we need to envision the solution, right? And so tech solutions, I mean, just anything, renewable energy. There's all kinds of technology now where that measures the energy that your building is using and says, oh, well, the lights are on in this room, turn them off, right? You don't need heat at this time of the day, so we're going to ratchet it down. So imagine that technology spread out over every building in San Mateo County, over every building in San Francisco. Those are huge energy savings. So I think that there's there's just so much tech, again, already out there, right? You can just go to a store right now and buy a Nest smart home meter, right? That helps you monitor your lights and your energy in your own home. So that technology is out there, needs to be rolled out, scaled up, et cetera. So I mean, the technology behind battery recycling, right? We know that we're going to need, in order to totally get off fossil fuels, we need to have solar panels that charge a battery, and then we use the energy in that battery at night when the sun's not out. Well, batteries are toxic. How are we going to recycle all of that? They use precious metals. How do we develop better battery technology that has less of an environmental impact, even though we know that we're really going to need that technology? So there's so much going on in this space.
Yeah, and that's what's exciting about the future of all of this too, is that like, I don't even know where tech is going to sit into this, like, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 100 years from now. It's going to be amazing to see how tech innovates and communicates more and updates our processes and infrastructure. I'm so excited.
Yeah, thank you both for answering that question. I also have another question, which is, what are the most critical changes that we must make so that technology being produced is being implemented in our society quickly?
Money. What money and political will, these things. Kamille.
Yeah, I didn't mean to laugh, but yes, you're right. I think also the passion behind what tech is being developed is also essential to make sure that it happens accordingly to meet the needs of the problems we're seeing right now. We need individuals to care enough to know that like, this is where tech needs to go. And this is what I'm trying to pursue as a goal. Or even just understanding like what we're afraid to lose and understanding like what that problem looks like to me individually and what tools I need to get to seeing something better, I think too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It happening quickly is such an interesting aspect of it that I'm struggling with.
Right. And I think that's some of the money part of it. So I talked about the Department of Energy projects. You know, they invest in a lot of technology that then gets rolled out. And so I think it is a government and market solution, right? I mean, our government invested a ton of money in getting those COVID vaccines ready and rolling out the door. And that is the role of government, to work together. It's not going to be completely market driven, right? We're going to have both us helping move this technology along and then the market helping to scale it up. But it is doable, right? That's like, it's doable.
So now I'm going to open up to the audience to ask any questions. So thank you all for answering these questions.
I actually had a question. I have two questions specifically to each speaker. Shawn, you mentioned how, just in your childhood itself, you were prevented from taking classes as a woman. I'm very interested in knowing how maybe your work has been impacted by being a woman, or have you faced any discrimination in this industry, in the climate change industry, that you'd be comfortable talking about?
Yeah, well, okay, so a couple of things. I'm kind of old and grizzled, so I don't get it as much, but we got a bunch of funding from the Department of Energy several years ago to look at solar plus battery storage. How do we overcome regulatory barriers? How do we overcome financial barriers? Doing this big study for this. And we were presenting and we were having conferences, and invariably a lot of our younger staff who are female engineers working in renewable energy, the guys would walk in and go, where do I get a name tag? And I'd be like, she doesn't give you a name tag. She's going to tell you about photovoltaics. Sit down and shut up. I mean, it's like that kind of stuff still happens. There's still a little bit of this weird bias. One of the things for a long time, my job did not say senior environmental specialist. And I got to tell you, I would love to go into meetings with engineers and architects and pull that electrical engineering degree out of my back pocket. Like, who's seen West Side Story yet? Da-da-na-na-na. I mean, so that is still there. And I also see it. So if you're a person of color in this field, I think it is even worse, because the environmental movement for a long time, there has been a lack of diversity. And I'm not so much sure that it's really a lack of diversity as it is, Kamille will know a lot about this, whose story gets told, right? I've done a lot of work in my job around making sure that other stories get told. Go to the city's website. We have like African-American environmentalists, Latinx environmentalists, because those people are out there doing the work. No one's talking about it. So yes, it's a little bit of an issue. It's gotten better. There's more work to do. We know we need to lift up those stories. We need to make this movement look like what it is, which is multicultural, multiracial, lots of genders, right? And again, that's about showing up. So yes, it is still happening. Not as bad as it was 40 years ago.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the perfect transition to my question to Ms. Kamille, which was, could you talk about how race has affected the work for climate change and environmental action, and why you felt the need to start that workshop on social and racial justice?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, I scroll through the news. There's a need right now. There's been a need for 450 years to do something differently, I think especially climate action, it's so obvious how inequitable the impacts of climate change are. Like, you can see Pacific Island nations disappearing because of sea level rise. And then people are forced to migrate to San Mateo County from those places, maybe. And now they're experiencing sea level rise here because the only affordable housing is going to flood in 2030. How does that make sense? How does that sound like something that is like achievable and what we should be pursuing in local government? Like, oh, I'm getting like really heated about it. Sorry, this is such a great question, but I think just knowing the history of how government has fed into systemic racism in our country, and then seeing how climate change is hitting people of color first and worst, was a clear indicator that like we got to do something. We have to start gathering people and just hearing what other people in county government think about these things and what they want to see differently. So I think it's definitely in its first stages. Like it's just like getting comfortable talking about these things in the workplace has been a huge hurdle, but it's the beginning. We have to start just working on this, and there's lots of pressure points where we will be in meetings talking about these things and it becomes very personal, but that's what we need to see. Just like Shawn was saying, like we need to share that grief together, and we need to use that to energize us and pull together the community that we do have as people of color, as people working in local government, as people who are worried about the future and want to see something better for everyone that's on this planet. Oh my gosh.
There's
Thank you
another
for sharing.
question from the audience, and it says, what do you think is the main impact on society from climate change?
Gosh. Yeah, what do you think, Shawn?
You know, there is no part of society that will not be impacted by climate change. And I suppose if it would be this idea of where people live, right? Like the main impact, everything, but specifically where we live. And just to build off Kamille's thing, I go back to South Louisiana a lot. You know, I help my family with hurricanes, et cetera. And a couple, you know, one of the places where people are just having to move, right? The federal government is paying for people to move out of areas that are basically uninhabitable because of sea level rise, right? And saltwater intrusion. And of course, those people are people of color. So the first places that the federal government is helping people move away from their land is in South Louisiana and Alaska. And those are indigenous nations that are now having to pick up everything and move back. Part of the heartbreak of that story to me is that these are people who move way down on the bayou so that they wouldn't get swept up in the Trail of Tears and be shipped to Oklahoma. So they're like, okay, well, fine, we'll move way down the bayou. We'll get away from these white people. It's like, no, I guess it's unavoidable, right? White people are going to come and screw with you all the time. So those people are having to move. But what is really getting lost is the culture. Pacific Island nations, oh my God, what a dense and rich culture. South Louisiana, what a dense and rich culture. And so those are heartbreaking, right? That culture just dissolves as people moved from the Pacific Islands to San Mateo County, or they move to Houston, Texas, or they move to Phoenix, wherever they can move, that culture just dissolves. So sorry, I'm so wordy, but Kamille, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the same thing. That's what I was going to bring up, is like the loss of culture and the loss of like how they historically have adapted to climate change, or seeing like, severe weather and how cultures have adapted to that, and how you can predict it in different indigenous communities, how they react, is like such a crucial part that will help us bring that into like the technological space of like how we adapt to climate change now. You like seeing how people historically have dealt with climate change and other extreme impacts, and understanding like where that fits into the modern world is so valuable. And if we keep shoving people into different land and not giving them a space to even be themselves, how can we expect the culture to exist, and how can we expect them to be a part of the conversation as we adapt to climate change in our county and anywhere? So yeah, it's a hard question, but it's going to impact pretty much every facet of our society.
Yeah, if there are any other questions from the audience, feel free to ask it now.
Hi, my name is Jason Blum. I'm a teacher in San Francisco. This is questions for Kamille. Thanks, both of you. Also, Shawn, for your presentations. Very informative. So let me get the camera. At our school site, we have about 1,200 students, and the yard after lunch is left a mess a lot of times. And it starts in our own backyard. And I've been trying to mobilize and coming up with solutions to that. But do you work with school sites to help them start in their own backyard? And it's a teachable moment. And a lot of times plastics get put in the compost and a bin and all that. So it starts right here in our own backyard. And then as we grow up, we even see it on our highways and our city streets, all the trash. So we can start small and changing behaviors right here. So I'm wondering, do you work with school sites out of San Mateo to help mobilize them, come up with solutions and get kids really energized?
Of course, yeah. I mean, that's all I would love to do at work all the time. But definitely supporting students. Unfortunately, my job limits me to only serving San Mateo County schools, but I know there's programs like this throughout all the Bay Area. And it usually the most successful projects of like someone seeing waste at the school that's not being handled properly has students wanting to talk to each other about it and asking teachers for help, asking for like outside resources to maybe get better signage. Or I recently just helped a high school edit a video that they're playing at their morning announcements that gives like the 5 things that are usually served at lunch and which bin they go into. And then it's the student's face standing there at the bin watching you sort that really makes that behavior change solidified, right? So it's holding each other accountable and starting the conversation amongst your peers, which is a hard thing to do in high school. I know we're worried about like how we come off to each other, but this is where it starts, is holding each other accountable and sharing what you know and why this is important to know.
And I'm at a middle school, so
yeah. So Jason, what middle school are you in?
I'm at APG&E.
Oh, okay. So the Department of the Environment does have a lot of educational resources. If you put your...
I've reached out and it's basically getting people mobilized at the school site with the kids and all that.
Yeah.
There's all, that's great and stuff. It's changing the mindset and getting people empowered and getting more and more people, because I end up cleaning up trash a lot at the school and sweeping up stuff. So it's not just that. And then it's getting a nucleus of people together.
Yeah. I love this video. I'm gonna.
So is there anybody in San Francisco? Because I've been in touch with sustainability and different things. I need somebody that could really help us motivate and get the kids on board.
Yeah. So let me just put my email here and contact me. I know we have a big project at APG&E called Climate Action Now, which is more about greening stuff. They're planting trees there. But let me see what other kind of resources I can help you with.
It's mobilization at the school site.
Yeah.
And then for the students that are, the high school students on the call, like people care about this. It's just hearing you and finding like an adult that can support this to make it happen. Like this is just exactly like what Shawn was saying. Like we need to start communicating about these things with each other, because maybe there is a middle schooler at Jason's school site that cares about this too and is worried and troubled by this. But if we're not talking to each other, how would we ever know? So, and then you saw how quickly Shawn shared a resource and has a whole myriad of things to share. So
the packaging of the school lunches and all that type of stuff that could be compostable, but there's plastics all over the place.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and
all right, I'll email you, Shawn. Thank you both very much.
Of course. Good luck, Jason.
Get going, and great job, everyone, for being involved.
yeah, and thank you so much again, Shawn and Kamille, for sharing your experiences, and to all of our audience questions.